Freddy Krueger is the ultimate nightmare villain, a burnt monster with a knifed glove who kills you in your dreams. A Nightmare on Elm Street has spawned 8 original movies, and a remake which didn't live up to expectations, but nevertheless, Freddy has given us some real great scares. So let's take a look at the top 10 scary Freddy Krueger moments. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for future updates. Number 10, Dan's Death, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child. This may not have been the best sequel in the franchise, however, there is one particular death scene which stands out. Dan, who is Alice's boyfriend in the movie, falls asleep and starts to dream, where he ends up jumping on a motorbike to drive to Alice. While he is en route, Freddy becomes the motorbike and ends up inserting a load of wires into Dan's body and starts to electrocute him alive with hot fuel, causing Dan's skin to melt off his entire body and turning him into this creature who is stuck on the bike, before eventually being ploughed into oncoming traffic. It's a brutal scene, and I believe there is a cut and an uncut version of this scene due to how brutal and torturous the death scene is. So even though this movie isn't the best sequel, it does have this great scene which proves just how brutal Freddy Krueger can be. Number 9, Julie's Death, Wes Craven's new nightmare. One of the better sequels in the franchise, and in this movie, Freddy starts to come out into the real world and starts to terrorize the people who starred in the first original Nightmare movie. There are some great scenes in this movie, but the one that stands out the most is Julie's death. They brought back the original kill from Nightmare 1 with this one, so Dylan has been injected with some sleeping aid, and babysitter Julie is trying to keep him awake, but there's nothing she can do, and before you know it, Dylan's fallen asleep and Freddy arrives. Freddy starts to drag Julie up the wall and onto the ceiling while slicing and dicing. A helpless Dylan watches in terror, and there's even a moment where Julie tries to reach down to Dylan for help, but there's nothing he can do. It's a great scene and it's Freddy at his best. Number 8, You Shouldn't Have Buried Me, I'm Not Dead, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. This sequel is often referred to as the movies that turn Freddy into cheese. However, there was one scene that is quite scary and keeps you at the edge of your seat. In a scene where character King K falls asleep, he ends up waking up at the place where Freddy was buried in the previous film. Freddy returns and the ground starts to open up, and inside we see Freddy's bones that they all fall into place together like a jigsaw puzzle, and then Freddy's burnt skin starts to rebuild and reform itself. The scariest moment in this scene is definitely the scene where Freddy's eye looks up at King K, followed by a creepy throat sound. It's very eerie compared to the rest of the film, and definitely deserves a spot on this list. Number 7, Puppet Strings, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. One of the best sequels to come out of the whole franchise, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 pulls no punches. In a scene where Philip has fallen asleep at the asylum, one of his puppets comes to life as Freddy, before growing into a life-size Freddy, who ends up slicing Philip's arms and legs, and then pulling out his veins, and turning Philip into a human puppet, leading him onto the roof and killing him. It's definitely one of the more gruesome scenes in the movie, accompanied with some very creepy ghostly music in the background. A lot of people end up watching this scene through their hands, and it's one of those scenes that will stick in your mind forever. Number 6, Nancy's Classroom Nightmare, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. Going all the way back to the original movie, which is arguably the scariest movie of the series where Freddy was truly evil. Halfway through the movie, Nancy falls asleep in class, and of course she starts to dream. It starts off with Nancy seeing her dead friend in the hallway being pulled along the floor by an invisible person. Nancy follows Tina's body into the basement where she hears some very heavy unnerving breathing, and then Freddy pops out, slicing his own body and causing some green ooze to come out. He then starts to chase Nancy through the boiler room. It's a very scary scene which makes you feel very claustrophobic. The feeling of not being able to get away from somebody in a dream is something that we can all relate to, which is what makes this scene even more scarier. Number 5, Put Me Down, You're Hurting Me, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. We are back to this amazing sequel, and in this opening scene, Kristen has fallen asleep and is in the dream world. She ends up in Freddy's house, which at this point is a run-down scary building. Kristen meets a little girl riding a bike who goes into the house and Kristen chases after her. Before you know it, Kristen is down in Freddy's basement and finds the little girl. The little girl creepily tells Kristen that this is where he takes us, before a load of noise arrives indicating that Freddy has just walked into his own house, and the little girl says Freddy's home. Kristen picks up the little girl and runs through the house, with Freddy hot on her tail. At one point, Kristen is stuck in some slime, but manages to get away from Freddy just in time. Kristen then runs into a room and is greeted by a load of hanging dead bodies. The little girl in Kristen's arms says, "Put me down, you're hurting me," and Kristen looks down to see the little girl is now a rotting dead body. It's definitely one of the better nightmare scenes, which has a lot of scares, and you genuinely feel really scared during this opening scene. Number 4, Coming Out of Jesse's Body, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now this sequel gets a lot of criticism, however I personally prefer this sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5. Anyway, this movie was very dark and had some very scary music thrown into it. It did have some ridiculous moments, however there is one scene that stands out. Freddy Krueger is hiding inside Jesse's body throughout the movie, and at one point when Jesse is sleeping over at his friend's house, Freddy decides to come out. Jesse starts to buckle over in pain, and Freddy starts to grow through Jesse's skin. At one point, Freddy's knives even comes out of Jesse's fingers, and Freddy's head starts to come out of Jesse's stomach while Jesse is screaming at the top of his voice. It's a brutal and disturbing scene, added with some very high tense music. You unconsciously grab the end of the sofa when you watch this scene. If you haven't seen this sequel, then it's definitely worth a watch. Number 3, Tina's Death, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. This is the scene that everyone thinks of when they talk about the Freddy Krueger films. It's Freddy at his most evil. The scene starts with Tina hearing something in the back garden, and so of course she goes to investigate. Tina ends up in the back alley and comes face to face with Freddy walking in the distance. In this scene, Freddy has these super long arms, and it's the first time that you see his glove in action scraping the walls. Freddy then starts to chase Tina, and they end up in the back garden. Freddy starts to taunt Tina by chopping off his own fingers with green ooze spurting out. Freddy then runs at Tina and ends up grappling on the ground with her. Tina tries to protect herself, but she ends up pulling off Freddy's face, and Freddy gives off this horrible evil laugh. Next minute, we are back in the bedroom, and Freddy starts to cut and slice Tina's body, drags it all around the room, up the walls and onto the ceiling. Tina's boyfriend tries to help her, but he doesn't know what's going on, and then Tina is killed and is thrown into a pool of blood. It's Freddy at his best, and this definitely deserves to be in the top 3 of this list. Number 2, Primetime Bitch, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. There was no way this scene wasn't going to be on our list. We are back to the best sequel movie, and character Jennifer is watching some late night TV. She can feel herself getting sleepy and she tries to keep herself awake by putting a cigarette out on her own skin. However, this doesn't work, because all of a sudden Freddy ends up on the TV show that Jennifer is watching before the signal is lost. The picture on the TV keeps fuzzing, and Jennifer walks slowly over to see if she can fix it. When she tries the buttons on the TV, she gives it a bang, and then out comes some Freddy arms, which ends up picking Jennifer off the floor. Freddy's head then comes out on top of the TV and starts to taunt Jennifer before delivering out one of the best lines of the series, "Welcome to Primetime, bitch," before throwing Jennifer headfirst into the screen. It's an amazing scene that everyone remembers. Number 1, Glen's Death, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. The infamous moment when Nancy's boyfriend is butchered. One of the final kills in the original Nightmare on Elm Street involved Nancy's boyfriend Glen, played by none other Johnny Depp. While Glen is asleep in his bed, out comes Freddy's arms, pulling and sucking Glen into the bed. Next minute, a load of blood comes flying out of the bed, shooting up to the ceiling. Then in walks Glen's mum, who cannot believe what she is seeing, and she ends up running out screaming. What's really good about this scene is the unnerving music playing in the background. It's a memorable moment, and what's great is that it's left to the viewer's imagination to what Freddy did to Glen in that bed, and to me that just makes things a lot scarier. And that was 10 scary Freddy Krueger moments. Let me know in the comments box below what is your favourite Freddy Krueger moment, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more future updates. Thank you all for watching, we will see you all again next time.